Welcome back to the Denison Forum podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Turman, your host. We're glad to have you with us for conversations about culture and faith that matter. And today we have a very interesting, exciting opportunity to talk about what's going on in the country of Israel and why it matters and how it impacts all of us. We are looking at insight into Israel, if you will. And our guest today is Calev Myers. Let me introduce him to you. He is an Israeli attorney, senior partner at Yehuda Raven and Company Law Offices, one of Israel's top-tier commercial law firms, where Calev manages their city center branch in Jerusalem. Former deputy president and current member of the board of trustees of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. Calev is also founder and chairman of Arise Foundation, which connects international business people to Israel, advancing economic development and diplomacy. You can read more and find out more about them at ariseforisrael.com. Calev is also founder and former CEO of the Jerusalem Institute for Justice. We're going to talk to him about that in just a moment. An Israeli institute that upholds justice, advocates for marginalized communities, and promotes freedom. The institute aims to improve the quality of life for individuals in Israel and throughout the Middle East. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the justice ministry that he founded, also his work with the Arise Business Foundation. And then we're also going to talk a bit about current events going on in Israel that will hopefully give us a better understanding of what's going on and also how we can pray. So we look forward to the conversation. Calev Myers, welcome to the Denison Forum podcast. We're glad to have you this morning.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Coming from Jerusalem, right? Is that where you're located today?
Yes, to be more exact, I'm in the Judean Hills, about 25 minutes outside of Jerusalem, but yeah, it's close enough. Jerusalem area.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, people that have been to Israel will identify that well, I think. But I've already shared a little bit of your professional background by way of introduction. Tell us a little bit about you that we wouldn't read in the professional resume. Who is Calev Myers otherwise?
Yeah, so probably the most special thing about me is my family. I'm married to a wonderful woman, Shelly Myers. She is a very gifted songwriter and musician. You can find her YouTube channel just at Shelly Myers, SHELIMYERS. She takes what you would call worship music, so mostly psalms from the Hebrew Scriptures, and puts them to modern music. Most of the Christian communities in Israel sing her songs. And so she's just one. She's also a professional parenting counselor, which means she's just been a fantastic mother. We have 5 children, ages 26 down to 13, and that's really the joy of my life. So I don't think you'd see that in my resume, but yeah, it's definitely the most important thing in my life.
Wow, that's awesome. So, yeah, you must have a very busy household with 5 kids. How many boys? How many girls?
We have 4 girls and 1 son. Yeah, the son actually, he's the same age as my oldest daughter, but he came a little bit later. We adopted him as foster parents. He was 16 when he joined our family. He's been with us now for 10 years. Now he's actually independent. He lives down the street, but we're his family in this world. So yeah, but our biological daughters are all girls. One of them is married. One's about to get married in the beginning of May, and so yeah, we're in an interesting period of life.
Fantastic. Well, that's great to know. I have a daughter myself who's considering adoption, and so great to know. But I was struggling to come up with a one-word description of what I know about you, and I don't think there's one word that's going to cover it. So we're going to talk about a wide range of things. I'm just thinking about titling this podcast "Insight into Israel." I've had the privilege of traveling to Israel 4 times now, twice in the last 6 months, in fact, and just love being in the country, love walking in the places where God did so many of his amazing things, especially obviously coming into this spring season for Christians and the places where Jesus walked and where Jesus suffered and died for us. Christians obviously holding that very dear, especially during this time, and
Yes.
the celebration of Passover coming for Jews, obviously, and even Ramadan for the Muslim community. But want to start, if we could, just with some of the background that you have and work that you've done relative to justice work as an attorney. Tell us about the founding and work of the Jerusalem Institute for Justice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, so I've been practicing law now for about 22 years, and I've been a partner in one of the largest law firms in Israel now since 2004, so about 18 years. And I myself, my mother is Christian, my father is Jewish. And so I do belong to the community of the Christian minorities in Israel. And I'm really the only person from our community that's a partner in one of Israel's larger law firms. And so for that reason, a lot of Christian organizations and Christian-owned businesses active in Israel have come my way. And so I represent the vast majority of certain Protestant evangelical, I would say, organizations in Israel, both for profit and not for profit. I'm the legal advisor to the Baptist Convention in Israel, and the Anglican Church in Israel, and the Assemblies of God in Israel, and Hillsong Church in Israel.
Right.
And so from some of the more traditional ones, some of the newer denominations, and the International Christian Embassy. If you came to Israel, you probably visited the Garden Tomb. They're a client of mine, and I've done legal work for CBN and TBN and Daystar and God TV. And so today I have a team of about 10 people. And if you take all the money that's either invested or donated by evangelicals in Israel, we probably represent 99% of it. So I live on a very interesting intersection between people who share a common faith and an interest in connecting to Israel and doing business in Israel. Twice in my life, I've started nonprofit organizations to kind of leverage the relationship and the resources on this intersections of relations to advance things that are important to me on my heart at the nonprofit level. The first organization, Jerusalem Institute of Justice, which you mentioned. And very simply, I began that as a young legal advocate to be a platform. If you believe in Jesus and suffer any persecution, discrimination, or harassment for your faith in Israel, the Palestinian territories, you can come and receive pro bono legal representation. We broadened out those activities to broader freedom of religion projects that benefit all the citizens of Israel, no matter what religion you belong to, and also general human rights advocacy. One of the things we recognized in the early years is that, contrary to common rhetoric, the primary abusers of Palestinian human rights is not Israel, the Israeli government, the Israeli soldier at the checkpoint, or a quote unquote settler building a home somewhere in Judea and Samaria. It's the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. If you really look, if you take the 30 some odd human rights defined in the International Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and you say, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom from torture and degrading treatment, etc. Who's really abusing the rights of Palestinians? It's primarily their own leadership. And so, but nobody talks about it. So the Jerusalem Institute of Justice became, and is still until this day, I believe, the only organization in this region that systematically researches, documents, and exposes the abuse of Palestinian human rights by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And we're talking about thousands of arbitrary arrests per annum, hundreds of cases of torture and degrading treatment, executions without trial. I mean, the list goes on. And it's really kind of the disappointing thing is how much money they're receiving from Western liberal democracies, including the United States. And so, I presented my reports before many governments around the world that support the Palestinian Authority, including Congress people and the Appropriations Committee of the United States federal government, calling on them to don't stop helping the Palestinians, but precondition all this funding on human rights reforms. Like, for instance, it would be quite reasonable to ask the Palestinian Authority to get rid of the statutory death penalty for selling land from Muslims to Jews or to Christians, or even converting from Islam to any of those other religions, death penalty, right?
Yeah.
And so those are type of issues, and we jumped into that just as a way to at first to protect Christian minorities in the Palestinian Authority, but it really affects everybody. And so what we do with Jerusalem Institute of Justice is unique because we've challenged the Israeli government on issues so that they take responsibility and make life freer and better for Israeli citizens, and we challenge the Palestinian Authority and Hamas so that they take better responsibility and make life freer and better for the Palestinians, instead of kind of the common road of blaming the Palestinians for all of Israel's problems and blaming Israel for all the Palestinians' problems. Say, wait a second, we have two administrations and governments here, and each of them could improve what they're doing in various ways to help their citizens. So let's focus on that.
Right, and that's one of the things that makes Israel and Jerusalem a very unique place is the intersection of the three world's greatest religions, right?
Right.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. When I was there just a few months ago, one of the Israeli leaders that I was talking to, working with, he was making the point, just as you were saying, that yes, there are obviously real issues between Israelis and Palestinians, but those really pale in comparison to the issues that Palestinians have with themselves and that they're struggling with, and that they're trying to find in many ways a consensus view of how the world is and how they fit into it. And is that a fair
Yes.
statement that they're trying to figure that out in the midst of living in this intersection, particularly in Israel, where
Yes.
these three great cultures and religions and faiths come together? Is that part of what their struggle is?
That's very accurate, and I would say so. So, whereas Israel is a Western liberal democracy, and just the fact that we've had 500,000 people on a almost daily basis demonstrating in the streets because of the fine tuning they want to make to our legal system. We could talk more about that, but their voice being heard without being harassed by the police, without with complete freedom of expression, freedom of demonstration, and everything else, is really a testimony to Israel's democracy. And those are Jews and Arabs and Christians and Druze and Bedouins and everybody demonstrating together, everybody for the benefit of Israel. The Palestinian Authority is a dictatorial police state. And so when you have a dictatorial police state, think of other countries in the world where you might have two cartels or heads of cartels vying for who is going to actually control the authoritarian government. That's exactly what you have in the Palestinians. It's very tribal. You have Fatah or the PLO, which was established by Yasser Arafat, and then Mahmoud Abbas is his. It came after him in the leadership there, and then you have Hamas, which is ruled by Islamic fundamentalists, and they're in control of Gaza right now, and they're constantly fighting between them as to who should be in control of the Palestinian Authority. When Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2006. They took all of the PLO leadership and shot them in the kneecaps and threw them off of 11-story buildings. That's it wasn't a peaceful transfer of power. So you can imagine. So the blood feud, let's call it, runs very deep. The vast majority of people who are killed every year by violence in the Palestinian Authority is Hamas killing PLO members or PLO members killing Hamas. I think they hate each other much more than either of them dislike Israel. And so that's what's happening there. And the Palestinians themselves pay a heavy price for this. And it's not a very easy thing to be a Palestinian living in the Palestinian territories.
Yeah, and it's something that we get only a very small glimpse of, and often a skewed view. And that's one of the wonders of traveling to Israel for various reasons, be it biblical pilgrimage or tourism, whatever it might be. One of the things you'll learn is it's not usually like what you think it is through international media outlets, that type of thing. I remember the first time I was there for a biblical study tour. We were a little bit surprised that we had not only an Israeli tour guide, but we had a Palestinian bus driver. And our guide got on the bus and introduced himself, introduced our bus driver, and said, "You may think that we hate each other, but we've known each other for more than 20 years. We've worked together for 20 plus years, and we're very good friends. Trust each other explicitly, even though we do not share the same faith, and obviously have some political differences as well. But that doesn't mean we can't live in proximity with each other, work in proximity with each other, be very good friends, and have a significant level of trust." And
Absolutely.
that's not something that you commonly see through the images and stories and pictures that we traffic in most of the time here in the United States. I'm sure you've had
Yes.
experiences similar to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, my mother's Christian, my father's Jewish. My best friend from law school is a moderate Muslim, great guy from Nazareth. He comes from a salt of the earth family. His grandfather was the first Arab judge in Israel. We're very, very close. His name is Muhammad Naamne. My neighborhood that I live in, it's a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. 99% of the residents are Jewish, but we live next to an Arab village, which is where I do most of my grocery shopping and other errands, and get my haircut and everything else. And we live life together in peace and coexistence. But it's not only at the, let's say, street level. We have an Arab judge on our Supreme Court currently, a Christian Arab judge. We've had Muslim Arabs before on our Supreme Court. Around 20 out of 120 members of our Knesset are Arabs, Arabic speaking, either Muslims, Druze, Bedouins. Very integrated into our society. The president of the largest bank in Israel right now, Bank Leumi, happens to be a Christian Arab. And so, yeah, absolutely. We don't really have a choice but to live together over here in as much peace and harmony as possible. And it's much better than you get, obviously, in any kind of standard media. Today, unfortunately, people just they want to tell the bad news and be sensational, and anytime anything goes wrong, that's what they show about Israel. But on a day-to-day basis, there's actually a lot of peaceful coexistence.
Right.
Yeah, I actually, when I think between Christianity and Judaism, people talk about interfaith dialogue. I actually see that as intra-faith dialogue, because Christianity was birthed out of Judaism.
Hmm.
If Jesus isn't the Jewish Messiah, then he's nobody's Messiah.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's prophesied by Hebrew prophets, and that's the whole basis of Christianity, right? And so there's a very deep level of understanding, I would say, both at the theological level. Of obviously there are disagreements, certainly regarding the Jesus and who he is, and who is the Messiah, and so on and so forth. But we have a lot in common, and Judeo-Christian ethics and values. We share a lot in common. I would say, the Muslim community believes in a different book, so it's a little bit different. The relationship there is less intra-faith and more interfaith,
Right.
as far as trying to understand each other. And obviously, if you go back to Abraham, then we're all cousins. But but nonetheless, the Quran is different than the Bible, and so it's a little bit different. But there are many, many, many moderate people from these three monotheistic faiths that know how to do life together over here and get along.
Right. So before we leave the topic of justice work and justice ministry for oppressed individuals and groups like you've talked about, I know you're very familiar as we would be with Micah 6:8 and the call to justice and to love mercy as we walk with God. That sounds like kind of the background and foundation of what the institute would be about. Are there some predominant issues, two or three, maybe that are really at the forefront of what the institute would be contending for right now on behalf of individuals or groups? It sounds to me like, if you're familiar, that the institute is similar to other organizations that we partner with here at Denison Forum, such as Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty here in the United States. It sounds similar to that in some ways, arguing cases before the Supreme Court, religious liberty issues, that type of thing. Are there a couple of predominant justice issues that you're seeing in your environment?
Yeah, I can mention a few of them. I do want to mention, by the way, just for the sake of being fair and honest, that I founded the Jerusalem Institute of Justice and led it for, I guess, 13 years. And then I transitioned out of leading that. And when I started in organizations, that's something else. I still support it. I actually donate to the Jerusalem Institute from time to time. They consult with me and so on and so forth. But I'm not officially representing them or, speaking on their behalf at the moment. I just have to say that. But I could mention three areas of advocacy beyond the Palestinian human rights, which I mentioned earlier. One has to do with immigration. When Israel was created, it was basically the first Zionists understood the problem of anti-Semitism, which if it's terrible today, it was horrific 100 years ago, and which. The anti-Semitism at that time, which was sweeping through Europe, eventually culminated in the Holocaust, was absolutely horrible. But the Zionists started coming, 30 or 40 years before that, and with this idea of our chance of being free from anti-Semitism will be to build a Jewish state once again with a Jewish majority in the land of Israel to return to our homeland. And so I say that to say that by and large, Israel was created certainly after the Holocaust and in terms of a place that if you suffer from anti-Semitism discrimination anywhere in the world because you're Jewish, there's one place you can come to be completely free of that and, live your life in freedom and prosperity. And so because of that, our first government, our Knesset, which is our name for the parliament, had to decide who is a Jew for the purpose of easy, streamlined immigration to Israel? And that's a complicated question. If I was to ask our listeners who is a Jew, if I had 1,000 listeners, I'd probably get 1,000 different answers. Right.
Yep.
So biblically, when according to, it seems like you were a Hebrew, which eventually became called Jewish, because the tribe of Judah is primarily the tribe that came back from the Babylonian dispersion. But you belong to the Hebrew people if your father was a Hebrew, basically. So if you look at the biblical genealogies, it's the son of the son of the son of the son of the son of. Wives are rarely mentioned, and there's many cases of people who had non-Hebrew spouses, such as Abraham with Keturah. As well as Joseph, who married Osnat, and Moses with Zipporah the Midianite, and Ruth and Boaz, and we know all the stories, right? And so however, that tradition changed about 200 years after Christ. With the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is the last kind of strong revolt of the Jewish people against the Roman Empire. At that time, many Jewish villages were sacked. Jewish women were raped, and it was difficult to tell who the father was. So the rabbis made a decision: from now on, we will recognize you as Jewish if your mother is Jewish. Period. That rabbinical tradition is held until today. So if you're an Orthodox Jew and you want to ascertain whether or not I'm Jewish, you'll ask one question: is your mother Jewish? That's it, right? Okay, let's fast forward to 1948, and with the foundation of the State of Israel, and in 1950, they decided to make a law called the Law of Return, which determines who's Jewish for the purpose of immigration to the Jewish state. And they had to decide, our first Knesset, do we go according to the very narrow Orthodox, so only if your mother is Jewish you can immigrate to Israel? Should we do something broader? And at that time, our political leadership wisely referred to the Nuremberg laws of the Third Reich, which determined who would be Jewish and not be sent to the gas chambers. And Hitler went in according to a 2-generation test. If any of your grandparents or either of your parents are Jewish, whether paternal or maternal, you'd be sent to the concentration camps. So our Knesset said, well, so they ended up passing a law that said if any of your grandparents or either of your parents are Jewish, you can immigrate to Israel. That law was then challenged with a famous case called the Brother Daniel case. So there's a Daniel Rufhausen, who was a Jewish from both of his parents, saved by a Catholic family in the Holocaust. This is in the late 60s. He saved in the Holocaust by a Catholic family, ended up converting to Roman Catholicism, becoming a Roman Catholic priest. He wanted to immigrate to Israel in the late 60s as a Jew, even though he was a Roman Catholic priest. And our government said, look, if who is a Jew is a difficult question, but you can't be a Roman Catholic priest and be Jewish. And this went to our Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court made a decision based on the black and white law of return, which said if any of your grandparents, or either your parents are Jewish, you can immigrate. He ended up getting permanent residency in Israel. our ultra-religious parties got very concerned that we might see a wave of immigration of Roman Catholic priests. So they changed the law of return at that time in 1971. So since 71 until today, it basically says the same thing, which is if any of your grandparents, or either of your parents are Jewish, you can immigrate unless your mother is Jewish and you've willfully changed religion. So somebody like Dan Rufhausen, who has a Jewish mother, but he's decided to officially join another religion, no longer eligible. So fast forward to today, you have many people like me who have a Jewish father, non-Jewish mother. Maybe their parents are Jewish, but they have come to faith that Jesus is the Messiah. Are they Jewish for the purpose of immigrating to Israel? These are the type of cases that I've handled many times, and the Institute has handled these cases over the years. So that's just it's a challenging. One of the things that complicates that issue is just that there's a very difficult history between um, institutional Christianity and the Jewish people. Today, let's say, as an evangelical Christian sitting in Texas, I think you're in Texas, right, Mark?
Correct. Yes.
Right. There's so much support and love for the Jewish community, for Israel, so much interfaith dialogue, and it's wonderful.
Yep.
But if you go back some centuries, going back even 20 or 30 years, the only thing you would really learn about Christianity in Israeli schools was the Inquisitions, the Crusades, the Holocaust, Hitler using Christian propaganda, God forbid, and what he was doing. And so that is a complicated situation for Christian minorities in Israel. So we've handled a lot of those cases. We also took up human trafficking and that whole issue of human trafficking and prostitution. Prostitution was not illegal in Israel until 2019.
Oh, wow.
It was illegal to pimping, quote unquote, to buy or sell human beings, but the actual act of prostitution. So, the Jerusalem Institute of Justice helped lobby through a law. It was about a 10-year project to make prostitution illegal in Israel. It was eventually passed in 2019, according to what we call the Nordic model, which was first adopted in Sweden and Norway and those countries, which is criminalization of the client. So to recognize the fact that the real victim within prostitution is the woman. And, statistically, like over 90% of women who go into prostitution were sexually abused at some time in their life. I mean, it's,
right.
And then lost their self-esteem to the point of being willing to sell their bodies and endure horrific treatment and pain in that industry. And so in jurisdictions, like some jurisdictions in the United States where both the prostitute and the client and the pimp are criminals, the one who's arrested many times is the prostitute right. Because she's the easiest to apprehend. And then you have the police working against her and the social workers trying to help her. And so there's not consistency within the system. When you put the focus on criminalizing the client, which we succeeded to pass in Israel, both the police, the law enforcement agencies, and the social workers work together on behalf of the woman. So we really think this is the best solution, and we helped lobby that through. And so I'm glad to say that prostitution is illegal today. Yeah. It's a criminal offense to purchase sex services from another human being, man or woman. So it's the client who's the criminal in that situation. Yeah. And now the Institute is working on helping to legislate and push through public budgets and programs for rehabilitating women who are now breaking out of the prostitution cycle. Okay. So that's good. And I also just want to mention that trafficking has gone way down. Israel used to be a significant destination for human trafficking. They would kidnap women in Eastern Europe and then take them down around Africa, smuggle them across the Israel-Sinai border, our southern border, and put them to forced sex labor. But that pretty much came to a complete halt in 2010 because we built a fence, a security fence on our entire southern border. It might sound similar to stuff you guys are dealing with in Texas.
Yeah, we've heard about such things for sure here in Texas, especially.
Exactly. So most of our hard drugs and human trafficking was coming across our southern border as well. Right. The fence and our fence is a complete fence, no holes. I mean, it's patrolled by our army and so on and so forth. It brought down human trafficking effectively to zero because you would have to traffic a woman against her will through the very strict security at Ben Gurion Airport to get her in today, which is virtually impossible. Yeah. So yeah, so that had definitely worked for us. I'll just mention one other issue.
Okay.
I mean,
Sure.
we're very so the Christian minority, definitely the Christian minorities in Israel are probably between 200 and 300,000 people, including all the denominations, the Orthodox, the Catholic, the Messianic Jews, the Protestants, etc., out of a population of 9 million. So it's pretty, it's a pretty small community.
Right.
The community of Jewish believers in Jesus, or believers from a Jewish descent, whether you call them Messianic Jews or whatever else, or even a smaller community, 20 or 30,000. One case that we worked on was getting public licensing for a school, a Messianic Jewish school in Israel. All the teachers, all the students are Messianic. They're about 120 kids, grades first through ninth grade, actually. So it's both elementary and middle school, and that took some legal work, actually, because at first the request was denied based on the fact that they didn't have enough students.
Hmm.
At that time, this is 6 years ago, you needed 120 students at least to be licensed as a school. They only had 80, and that was the main reason that that was denied. And then, we represented them and we said, look, when you're dealing with a very, very small, unique minority
Right.
within a society like this, then you should be able to bring down those relative numbers pro rata to their actual representation within the public, and give them the right, like any other community, to have their school that's recognized by the government. And we actually won that. And so those type of cases of representing this community and making sure that everybody, including Christian minorities, can participate in and enjoy freedom of religion in Israel. I'm happy to say, let me just say this, I'm happy to say that the Institute, to the best of my knowledge, has successfully handled about 1,500 cases over the last,
Wow. Yeah.
since 2004. So it would be over the last 18 years, including 27 Supreme Court victories. We do have a very good legal system with an independent judiciary that upholds civil rights, and so we're very thankful for that. And I as a civil rights lawyer, have all the tools at my disposal to protect and advance the rights of these communities.
Yeah. Well, great work, and obviously some similar issues. The world is more similar than dissimilar all around the
Yeah.
world. So we have our unique forms of issues around immigration for sure, as well as a lot of commonality in battles with things like sex trafficking and other topics that we could talk about. So just so much good work being done there, not only here and there, but around the world, just trying to help people to have a better life and a freedom that they have a right to inherently. And so just grateful for that.
Yes.
But that also kind of connects to what you are doing today, which is leading the Arise Foundation, which doing
Yes.
some research just to get ready for today's conversation. Some incredible stories of economic development partnerships internationally back into Israel, and how that fosters and facilitates diplomacy, the art of different peoples, different nations getting together. Um, Tell us what prompts a lawyer who's been doing civil rights work to get into something in this area. People can find it at ariseforisrael.com, and would encourage people to go check that out. But what prompted you to get into this area of work?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And so it is because I'm a civil rights lawyer that I actually started getting into this area of work, because an insidious campaign started somewhere back around, I don't know, I think it must have been around 2012 ish. A campaign called BDS, which stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanction. They started going to public forums, university campuses, and international forums around the world, and claiming that Israel is, first of all, it's an apartheid state, which, like I explained earlier, couldn't be further from the truth. So here, I'm a civil rights activist, right? And I'm advocating on behalf of minorities in Israel and winning cases and achieving, freedom of religion and civil rights and human rights, and seeing we have Arab judges on our Supreme Court and Muslims in our Knesset, and a vibrant democracy. Is it perfect? No, but like any other country, we have our issues. But that's very far from an apartheid. It's definitely a misuse of that term, a gross misuse misuse of that term, and basically saying that, until certain goals are met by the fundamentalist Islamic agenda, that number one, all of the descendants. So we had this conflict in 1948 where about 850,000 Jews were forcefully expelled or voluntarily left Arab nations around Israel, came into the fledgling Jewish state, received citizenship, etc. At the same time, about 750,000, what we refer to today as Arab Palestinians, either were forcibly expelled or voluntarily left into the Arab nations around Israel. We had a population exchange.
Hmm.
But these populations of refugees had a very different destiny. The Jews that came into the Jewish state received full citizenship, jobs, got integrated, and so on and so forth. The Arab Muslims that went into Arab Muslim states received nothing. And until today, they're kept in a forced refugee status because the Arab League said, we will never grant any of these people citizenship. That would be a de facto recognition of the legitimacy of the Jewish state. So, so what they're saying is, until Israel receives and gives full citizenship to all the descendants of Palestinians from 1948, which are now around, depending on who you ask, between 5 to 7 million, which obviously means Muslims would become the majority, Jews would become the minority, and the one Jewish state in the world would cease to exist. Until that happens, we need to boycott Israeli companies, boycott Israeli professors on our campuses, and sanction them in every way possible. Blacklist them in international forums and everything. This really bothered me as a civil rights advocate. I'm thinking it's a completely disingenuous campaign built on lies and propaganda that serves a fundamentalist Islamic agenda, which doesn't help the Palestinians, right? The thing that would help the Palestinian descendants of the refugees was these Arab Muslim nations would take responsibility for these Arab Muslims, which, by the way, are now in their third generation. They were actually born there. They should be able to receive jobs, receive citizenship, receive political rights and everything else, to keep them in a forced refugee status, saying that one day we're going to send them all back to Israel. It's really terrible, and it doesn't help anybody. On top of that, there's if you look at the Palestinians in the West Bank, let's say they're 1.5 million people. Again, we can argue over demographics, but more or less 1.5 million people. 10% of them, so 150,000 Palestinians, are gainfully employed in Israeli companies and Israeli jobs, where they make salaries which are 5 times higher, 5x higher than the same position they would receive in the Palestinian Authority.
Wow.
And on average, put food on the table for 10 people. This is the Palestinian economy is completely based on Israeli jobs. In all of the cases that this campaign actually succeeded in getting a factory shut down that was active in the West Bank, the only people who lost their jobs were Palestinians. Those factories were then transferred over what we call the Green Line into Israel proper, and all those jobs were given to Jews. So anyone who says, let's boycott Israeli companies to help Palestinians, has no idea what they're talking about. As you can see, this really bothers me because it's such an insidious and terrible campaign. Now, it bothers me for another reason. My great grandfather, Abraham Myers, his family came from Darmstadt, Germany, which was the first city that Jewish businesses were boycotted in it by the Third Reich in Germany. So the fact that 100 years later we haven't learned any lessons, and there's still this campaign which somehow has made its way into legitimate international forums and companies and so on and so forth, it really bothers me, that you would boycott a company just because it's owned or managed by Jews. And so what do we do to combat all that? I figured the best way to combat the boycott campaign is very simply by creating more business connections between businesses in Israel and Christians around the world who follow Israel, are interested in Israel, are excited about Israeli technology, and want to get connected. And I took about 4 years of my life, starting in 2017. I transitioned out of leading Jerusalem Institute of Justice, started Arise, and I went and mapped out all these Christian business networks: the International Christian Chambers of Commerce, Full Gospel Businessman Association, the CEO Forum, the Euro Partners. There's probably 20 or 30 at least major organizations like this. They're networks of evangelical Christian business leaders. And I reached out to them and invited them to intense business-to-business matchmaking events. We had our flagship event pre-corona was a big summit. It was a 2 to 3 day summit In our last one in 2019, we had 550 business people from 47 different countries created. So you had Christian business networks on the international side. On the Israeli side, we worked with the Federation of Binational Chambers of Commerce, Ministry of Economic Affairs, the big venture capital funds, and we put together hundreds of prearranged face-to-face, I'd call it business speed dating. Based on our feedback forums, tens of millions of dollars worth of transaction came out of this activity, which is really exciting to us because those are connections, those are relationships, and it just makes this stupid, terrible boycott campaign completely impotent because you're creating business, which is the opposite of what they're trying to do. So now we then transitioned after Corona into doing innovation tours. So we'll take small groups of a bit of organic business people from a church, from a community, from a business network, and 20 to 30 people, and bring them to Israel. Usually 50%, 50% of our content is Bible. So if you're coming to Israel, you should probably learn something about what happened here, and that's a very inspiring story.
Yep.
And then 50% is we profile in a positive way the business people coming, exactly what their interests are, what kind of connections might be interested in them. And then we try to expose them to presentations of Israeli innovation companies in their area of practice that they can benefit from, make those connections, and great relationships, leads, connections, investment, and trade deals comes out of this. So that's wonderful. We also have, now that after the signing of the Abraham Accords, we've invited business people from the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, into our activities as well. And like you began with your question, we see business as a fantastic platform for peaceful coexistence. And our former Prime Minister, Shimon Peres, said, politicians make problems, business people find solutions. So
right.
that's what we're trying to do.
And it's very hard to hate somebody that you know personally, right? And and when you start being able to do mutually beneficial things in the context of business that help people to prosper, help people to have jobs, help people to discover solutions to problems. I was moving around on your website, saw the story that just fascinated me because this relates to something that I think a lot of our other listeners will resonate with, which is just the problem of clean water. There's a number of organizations, lots of churches get in. I have a close friend that just went to Central America and spent most of a week working on trying to bring simple solutions for clean water into this, under-resourced country and under-resourced villages, because so much of the world just suffers without good, clean water. 80% of the world's diseases, I'm told, are waterborne diseases. And I'm learning on your website about this company that is part of Arise that basically takes a small ATV and puts a water purification machine onto it, and it can serve 20,000 people with clean water. A company called Gal Mobile. Tell us a little bit about that story, or another story about what you've seen happen in Arise.
Yeah. Well, let me say this first of all, that Israel has more PhDs per capita, publishes more technical papers per capita, has more university degrees per capita by a large margin than any other country. For that reason, we also have more startup companies per capita, more R&D centers per capita than any other country in the world. So Israel is like ground zero for high tech innovation today. Gal Mobile, which you mentioned, is just fantastic. They have a reverse osmosis unit that they put on the back of a small RTV vehicle where you can drop anywhere, and you put a pipe in any kind of liquid, like salt water,
any pool of
sewage
water,
any pool of water. That's right. And on the spot, you'll get very clean, pure drinking water from the other side. So, in natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, even tsunamis, 80% of the people die in the first 2 days from lack of water, lack of clean, drinkable water. So they can either parachute these things in or bring them on a ship or a plane. And it just saved tens of thousands of lives, particularly in natural disaster events. They're also distributing them through third world countries that just have poor access to drinkable water today, not anything connected to natural disaster. That's an exciting one. In water tech, we could also talk about water gen, which is air to water generation. So they have 3 different sizes of units. One of them is like a drinking fountain, which I think it does 50 up to 15 liters of water a day, so pretty much enough for a small office, with whatever 5 to 10 employees. Their next unit is about the size of a refrigerator, and it just very simple electricity, like the type of electricity you need to run a refrigerator, basically. And that'll convert enough water for, let's say, a whole floor of a hospital.
Wow.
Without just being connected to air. That's all. And their other unit is as large as probably about the size of a small Jeep. That can generate, I believe it's 5,000 liters of water a day, which is definitely enough to keep a whole village in Africa alive, connected to a simple generator, doesn't take a lot of electricity, and just creates water from air anywhere on planet Earth. So these technologies are really amazing. And water gen is really supported by a high net worth Jewish Israeli philanthropist who said, the goal of my life is within the next 10 years to make sure that nobody in the world dies from lack of water. So there's so much within the Jewish ethic that we have a principle called tikkun olam, which is the understanding that God put us on planet Earth to fix it to the greatest of our ability. In other words, creation is wonderful and beautiful, but because of mistakes of human beings, and the way there are many broken things, and so our job, our calling, is to fix the broken things. And tikkun olam, it's literally fixing the world, and this really drives. It's really the basis of our culture of innovation. What can we do to make a world better for humanity? And so that's why you're seeing all this innovation. I just love telling you stories. You mentioned the Arise for Israel YouTube channel. You can go there and see about 50 different interviews. We put them out once a month with CEOs of Israeli innovation companies. A lot of leads come out of this. We've invested $0 in promotion over the last 12 months and had 2.5 million views on those videos. So they're inspiring stories. They're 6 to 10 minutes, but just tell stories of great technologies. Check that out. Also, people who might be interested in supporting Arise, you go to ariseforisrael.com. What we do is people who become monthly donors for our organization, we send small gift packages once a quarter with Israeli products, culinary, fashion, and cosmetic products. Just a way that people like to integrate Israeli products and culture into their life, but it's also another way of us supporting small businesses.
Right.
So small businesses in Israel that would otherwise be under a threat of boycott are now, everybody who signs up for that is it's another order from a small business in Israel that, it blesses you because you get to enjoy these projects, and it blesses these companies. So that's another thing we do at Arise. Thank you for directing people to our website.
Yeah, and just connects people, like I said, really, as you were talking, just reminds me of obviously the first couple of chapters of Genesis, right? Of being stewards of the creation of God, and now in a broken world, being stewards who not only care for the world in great ways, but try to fix the world because of its multiplicity of problems. But you mentioned some of the uniquenesses of the Jewish culture. Dr. Dennison, our founder, likes to talk about how there are more Nobel Prize winners from the Jewish community than any other group by far, and just an evidence really of the fulfillment of what God said in that original Abraham covenant, right? That I'll bless you so you can bless the world, and experiences and environments like Arise are allowing that and enabling that to happen. And so would encourage people to just get invested in that, to check it out, to go to ariseforisrael.com and learn what this opportunity and conversation is all about, and see where God might enable them or allow them to be involved in it. Just some amazing stories. And like I said, when you're working together to solve problems that matter, that brings down all kinds of walls and raises all kinds of bridges. And just being able to do that is such great work. Want to take a few minutes before I let you go just to talk about current events in Israel. And this could be lots and lots of conversation. We're not used to seeing, upwards of 500,000 people in the streets of Jerusalem. We're used to seeing that in other parts of the world, but not used to seeing that in the environment of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and that type of thing. I got to tell you, when I was in Israel back in October, that's when the election was going on. That was when Benjamin Netanyahu came back into power as prime minister. But before we get into the details, give us, if you can, just the thumbnail understanding of how Israeli government works. It is a parliamentary system, which for us as Americans is a little bit foreign. It's really more about, we have three branches of government. Parliamentary system usually is basically understood as a two branch system, more or less, with a prime minister. Give us a short course on that, and then tell us why has Israel been so disrupted over the last week or two?
Yeah, I'll do my best to do this in a few minutes. You said that you said that accurately. So in our parliamentary system, in any given election, we usually have between 30 to 35 parties that run in an election. Okay, so it's much different than the two-party system in the United States, and primarily two parties because you have some independents.
Yeah, we're trying to see if we could even get to a third, but we've had multiple failed attempts at even getting to three, much less 30.
Right.
So,
And then out of those 30 to 35 parties, usually between 10 to 13 actually get enough votes to get into the Knesset. You need a minimum of three seats. There's about 150,000 votes to get across the threshold to have at least three seats out of the 120 in the Knesset. The parties that actually get across the threshold then have to create a coalition government. So the leader of the largest party has the opportunity to invite other parties that are more similar to him politically and policy-wise, invite them to join the coalition government. You need at least 61 out of the 120 because the coalition government has to represent a majority within the parliamentary system. The head of each of the parties that joins the government, right now there's four parties in our government, the heads of each of those parties become a minister in a certain government portfolio. So they're ministers in the government. The rest of the people on the list are legislators. For that reason, our executive and legislative branches are enmeshed. Our ministers have been elected basically as parliamentarians that became ministers, and so I don't know if it's exactly one branch, but it's two branches that are very enmeshed and very connected.
right.
The only thing you have to balance that out within a system of democratic checks and balances is our judicial branch, right?
Right.
So if the government comes up with a crazy law, and what is the power of our judicial branch to criticize or even strike down that law? And the reason that you're seeing the demonstrations today, even though they're probably 75 years too late, is that Israel never created a constitution. Our first Knesset was intentionally put together as one of its first jobs was to create a constitution, but it did not do that. It was such a controversial issue at that time. One of the big controversies is, what does it mean to be a Jewish and democratic state? Because usually democracy has rights for every religion, and it doesn't mention a certain religion. But again, in order to be a homeland or asylum for persecuted Jews around the world, we want to maintain a Jewish majority. In what other ways do we? Is this a Jewish state?
Right.
We know how it's a democratic, so it's a Jewish state, and our religious faction, political parties, religious factions have always been nervous about creating a secular constitution, which could take authority over basic issues that, as far as they're concerned, are determined by Jewish scripture and rabbinic interpretation. So for that reason and others, our first Knesset never ended up creating a constitution like it was supposed to. And it said, we'll create basic laws, which are laws that deal with basic constitutional rights, the right for human dignity, the right of freedom of expression, freedom of movement, basic, right? Those basic laws will be joined together to create a constitution. But they never decided how a basic law could be determined. So now you have, let's say, something at a constitutional level, which theoretically you could strike down normal laws based on a basic law. But what if those basic laws can be passed with a simple majority in the Knesset like any other law, right? So you have all these issues that were never dealt with properly, and they weren't dealt with properly by anybody except the Supreme Court, which in 1995 said we have the right to strike down a normal law based on a basic law. They gave the basic law this level of constitutional authority within our system. And in 2021, our current Supreme Court Justice, Esther Chayud, actually said theoretically we could strike down a basic law based on basic democratic values. And so the Supreme Court gave itself the ultimate authority within our system in a way that was never determined by our parliament, while the Supreme Court justices are appointed by what we call a professional committee, which has a majority of jurists on it. So it's a committee of 9 people. 5 out of the 9 people are jurists. There are 3 Supreme Court justices and 2 representatives of the Bar Association. 4 out of the 9, so the minority, are politicians, 2 members of Knesset and 2 government ministers. So you have a guild of legal professionals that's self-perpetuating itself by appointing people with a similar worldview, setting itself as the ultimate authority within our democratic system to strike down laws and basic laws. And everybody, including myself, said this is out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to determine, how can a basic law be created? How can it be struck down by the court? If it is struck down by the court, is there a supermajority in the Knesset that can overturn that? And how should judges be appointed? The problem is, and this is the reason that we have all these demonstrations, that the current government is putting forward reforms that are way out of balance on the other side. So it's kind of, in English, you have the saying, 2 rights don't make a wrong. So,
Yep.
And, you're taking a system that has all the authority in the judiciary and giving all the authority to the executive. The coalition government will appoint the judges. They're saying the coalition judgment can overturn any decision of the Supreme Court to strike down a law with a simple majority of 61 real votes out of 120 in the Knesset. That's not a super majority. That's a simple. That's the minimum majority you need to do anything, right? And nobody can nobody can touch a basic law. So as soon as we call something a basic law, there's no way to strike it down whatsoever, which is also a concern, because what you can basically start calling any law a basic law and give it this ultimate protection. So, so do I think there should be reforms like most people in Israel? Yes. But should it be that extreme? I don't think so. And this is why so many people are out on the street, because they're so concerned about preserving the nature and the character of our democracy in Israel, and to coming up with solutions. For instance, let me just take the issue of the supermajority, right? So you want to overturn the decision of the Supreme Court by the Knesset, by the parliament,
which is referred to as this is referred to as the override clause, right?
The override clause, exactly.
Yep.
For me, I think, like, if you said you had an override clause of 80 real votes out of 120, perfect. You need 61 to set up a government. So you're going to need a few votes, a few hands of the opposition as well. And so if it's a basic right or something that's, says no problem. Like, I don't have any problem with the override clause, but not such a simple majority, right? So these things need to be balanced. Let me just end by saying, for, the friends of Israel out there, and I know many of them definitely in Texas, but in the United States in general and around the world, I think that what you're seeing right now is the democratic system in Israel play itself out in a very effective way. Again, 500,000 people in the streets out of a population of 9 million is a lot. It's hard in anywhere in the world to get that number of people out on the streets. But for a small country like us, this is serious. Right. So you're seeing our system work its way, work through this issue. Bibi Netanyahu, in order to, calm down the whole situation, put a complete freeze on the current legislative blitz and said, let's sit down with the opposition party leaders at the president's house. Our president is more of a formal position. The prime minister is the executive position. The president is more of like a formal diplomatic position. Let's go sit down with the president, and who can arbitrate a solution, come up with legal reforms that will have a broad consensus. And so I have hopes that this process will actually bear good fruit. And I think for our friends around the world, I would just wait and see. I think at the end of the day, the reform that goes through will be a good reform. I think it became extremely intense over here, but I think there's goodwill on both sides of both the opposition and the coalition, and so I'm hoping that the long needed legal reforms that actually are passed in the end will be balanced and moderate, and we'll find some kind of a good balance. As a lawyer who works on a lot of commercial agreements, I would say, you always know you struck the right balance when nobody is happy, 100% happy on both
exactly.
sides.
Which relates to my world of ministry as well. When you're and social cultural issues as well. When nobody is happy, nobody got everything they wanted. That usually means you're about in the right spot. But it just and speaks to a couple of things. Speaks to the complexity of these kinds of issues that you just can't really grasp this with just a couple of headlines. Weeks, months ago, people were saying that this was just Netanyahu's attempt to solve his own legal problems. It's much bigger than that. Much bigger than that, and
Much deeper.
much deeper. And like you said, something as complex as it's kind of mind-boggling. We talk so much in the United States about our Constitution, the rule of law, the Constitution being this sacrosanct document. It just kind of is mind-boggling to say, well, we've been a nation for 75 years, but we haven't figured out how to get around to the Constitution yet. And something has filled that vacuum, right? All of these basic laws have basically kind of connected themselves and been connected to form at least the fundamentals of some kind of a constitution to operate off of. But it's also a testimony in some ways to the awareness of the Israeli citizens, and reading some of the and seeing some of the information that you shared, that this really started with the common soldier and with the common person saying, you know what, no, we've got to slow this down. We have to talk about this more. This is too far, too quickly. And really almost bringing the country to a standstill. It's been very unheard of that the airport would be shut down for a period of time, which affects the entire economy and region. But to see people just say, you know what, no, we want to have a voice in this, and we want to see something more reasonable emerge out of it, which is a completely democratic experience, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So
So, like I said, it's actually a beautiful expression of Israeli democracy. What's
right,
happening right now?
right, yeah, and a very I've heard you talk on occasion about what does it mean to be a Jewish democratic state. That's a very, very broad, deep, difficult concept. A parallel to that would be if we were trying to be a Christian democratic state, which some would say
That's
we
right.
have been, or we are, or we should go back to. It's the same kind of complexity when you talk about respecting all people, even when they don't share the same kind of faith overall, right?
Yeah, I would say that and this is my opinion, is it's possible to be a Jewish and democratic state, or let's say in the United States, as a Christian democratic state, as long as those things are. It's like saying a tree is both tall and green. These are measurements for two different things. One of them measures height, the other one measures color, right?
Right.
So, in what way are we? So, our government is democratic. Our government is not Jewish. Our religious culture is Jewish,
Mm.
right? So in our national anthem, we sing about the Jewish soul longing for a homeland. And on your dollar bills, it says "In God We Trust." There's a religious culture that's the culture of the majority. You might like it, you might not like it. If you live in one of the 10 European countries that has a cross on their flag, you might not. And you're a minority religion, you might not like saluting the flag. But it's a religious culture of the majority, and in that sense, we are a Jewish state. Also, in the sense that we're in a unique situation that we need to maintain a Jewish majority in our citizenship. So we have to be careful about immigration laws. There's only, like I said, there's only one state in the world with a Jewish majority, and you don't have to look very far to see anti-Semitism still alive in many corners of the globe, and so that's still a relevant project, right?
Right.
And so but that doesn't mean it should become a form of government. I don't think the vast majority of citizens in Israel don't want to be ruled by a Sanhedrin of rabbis like we were,
Right.
2,000 years ago, which wouldn't be good for Judaism or civil society. Just like I think if you had a council of pastors making decisions in Washington, it would probably be terrible for Christianity,
Right.
as well as for the general public, I'd imagine, right? So I think America has found a good balance in these issues, and Israel is only 75 years old and trying to figure out, exactly what we're going to do. So.
Yeah. Well, it's just fascinating and very, very helpful. So one last question for you, which is there one or two ways, Calev, that you would encourage us? We're often encouraged to pray for Israel, to pray for Jerusalem. The Bible tells us to do that. One or two prayer requests that you would suggest to us as we finish up today?
I think definitely praying for the peace of Jerusalem. I would say both internally, like focus on that. There's actually a scripture, obviously pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and which is many people take as a biblical command. But
Right.
we need those prayers both internally and externally, because we have the civil unrest currently, again, regarding everything we just talked about, and creating the right balances within our system. That my prayer would be that God gives our leaders much wisdom on these issues, but then protection internationally as well, because Iran is a looming threat. They're getting very, very close to having a nuclear missile system, and that's not something that that's not something we can take lightly. We learned 100 years ago that when somebody says, "I want to wipe out all the Jews off the face of the earth," and also has the military ability to make that happen, we're in serious trouble. And we're not where we were 100 years ago. We actually have a state and some of the most advanced defense systems in the world, but none of us want a major war.
Right.
War is ugly and terrible, and nobody ever really wins.
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So both sides are going to suffer terribly, and so I think that I would pray into that, and just that God would continue to protect us, and we'd be able to continue building peaceful relations with the moderate Muslim states around us that want to want to have diplomatic relations with us. Obviously, the biggest one that's kind of on the horizon is Saudi Arabia. Both Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, as well as Bibi Netanyahu, have expressed a desire to move forward and eventually bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. That's exciting for us. Very, very, very exciting for us. It seems like it might be getting a little bit off track right now. I don't know how much we don't have time to get into that.
Right.
But that's more because of the way that Joe Biden is treating Saudi Arabia than anything that has to do with Israel. But to continue to pray that those peace agreements will move forward and that we would be protected vis-a-vis Iran, I think would be a good thing to pray about.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the conversation today. So, yeah, absolutely. So great to get to talk with you and to get to know you a little bit better. Thank you for what you have done and what you are doing. And just want to thank our audience for being a part of the conversation. If you liked and were helped and encouraged by what you heard today from Calev and from our conversation, please rate and review us on your podcast platform. Share this with others so that they can find the conversation as well. And Calev, we look forward to a future conversation and learning more about your work and how things are going in Israel. Grateful for the conversation. Thank you today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and all the best.